We think you should know that Imperfect Heroes podcast is a production of Little Hearts Academy USA.
You're listening to episode 141 of Imperfect Heroes, Insights into Parenting, the perfect podcast for imperfect parents looking to find joy in their experience of raising children in an imperfect world. And I'm your host, DJ Stutz. Welcome back, all my heroes and heroines, to another episode of Imperfect Heroes. And I am so excited for what we are talking about today. And so, last week we introduced our new theme of patience. And then this week we're going to talk a little further. But before we get started on this fabulous conversation, I just want to remind everyone that we've set it up in a kind of a new way so that whether you go to the website of www.littleheartsacademyusa.com, which is the coaching website, or if you go to the podcast website, which is, well, you're probably there, but I'll tell you anyway. It's www.imperfectheroespodcast.com. When you go to those pages, you'll see a little pop-up now that will say, register for our newsletter here. And so I would love to encourage you to go ahead, register, and get in on that. We only send that out twice a month, so you're not inundated with a bunch of stuff, but it's going to help you understand what's coming up with the podcast, what you can do to connect with your kids, and the theme for that month. We're going to have some activities and hacks that you can do to enjoy your time as a parent, because we know, especially here at Imperfect Heroes, that joyful parenting is just the best way to get through it all, isn't it? So we're going to go forward with that. Sign up, and then also please hit the rating and review, follow us or subscribe depending on which platform you're listening on. But that way you're going to keep up to date, and when we put up a new episode, you're going to get that notification. And please remember, 5 stars is the appropriate number of stars to give us if you are rating. So thank you very much. Let's move on with our topic for today. So my guest is Dr. Stephen Rowley, and he actually has some amazing work that he's done on adoption, and he can tell you a little bit about that. And through that, although we are going to connect to patience and teaching our children about patience, why it's important to teach our kids that, and how to manage through and get that through their heads, right? Well, and our heads too, because let's be honest, Stephen, isn't it true? Parents are just as impatient as kids sometimes.
Probably more so.
I agree.
You have to live a longer life to learn how to be impatient as well as patient. So.
It's true. It's so true. So, Stephen, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've got going on, who you are, and then we'll talk a little further.
Well, very briefly, I am currently a psychotherapist. I live and work on Bainbridge Island, Washington, which is across the water from Seattle, 35-minute ferry boat ride. I had a 40-year career in education as a teacher, principal, superintendent, and in 3 different universities in the Northwest. So I've been around. I can't keep a job. Lately, actually just about 2 years ago, I began work and wrote a book called The Lost Coin, a memoir of adoption and destiny, published by Chiron, a publication. It's on Amazon. And I've been doing since then. This actually feeds into the topic quite well. I spent the better part of my life in search of my birth parents.
Wow.
I found my birth mother, which is kind of the cornerstone, the heart of the book, when I was age 40 and she was age 60, but in very difficult circumstances. And then 2 years ago, word came to me from 23andMe with no effort on my part except belonging to 23andMe. Suddenly I had half sisters. But they discovered me. They had no clue about me, and I had no clue about who they were. So it was a pretty big surprise. So I've lived and breathed patience of various kinds, not only with my birth parents, but if you've ever been a superintendent, you have a thing called a school board. If that doesn't test your patience with life, nothing will. So my wife and I also adopted our son. So I'm an adoptee and the parent of adoption. Talk about patience. If you've worked for 50 years in your life to find your own original birth certificate and you still can't get them, I don't know if that's a test of patience or of your neurosis that you keep trying to come up with the impossible.
So as we're talking, though, let's talk for a second about what is patience. How would you even define that to someone?
Right. Well, this is a little lengthy, but I did look it up before it came on. It's a kind of fulsome definition, I think, has to help us flesh out what we mean by it. So
Yeah,
patience is a
exactly.
virtue and a psychological attribute characterized by the ability to tolerate delay, trouble, or suffering without getting angry or upset. It involves the capacity to remain calm, maintain self-control, and accept or endure difficult situations, provocation or annoyance with perseverance and composure. This, of course, is the ideal definition, right?
Sure.
Patience is often associated with a level of endurance that allows individuals to face challenges, obstacles, or waiting periods without resorting to hasty actions or decisions. And this is where I think it can be applied in so many settings. I actually think is an amoral definition, because you can talk about people who are, I don't know, mafia hitmen. If you're going to do your job, or a sniper, you have to have patience, even though you're going to end up killing somebody and doing what you do. It's considered a valuable skill in many cultural, philosophical, and religious contexts, and can lead to better decision making, improved relationships, and overall well-being. It's a key component in achieving long-term goals. It enables individuals to persist in their efforts over time despite setbacks and delays. So by definition, this is a very fulsome thing. It's an idealized definition. But I have to think, among other things, is that it is like many things in life. It's an ability that's acquired.
Yes.
I don't think you can be born patient. I think you have to learn patience.
Yeah. With my 5 kids, I've got 5 very different personalities. And I do have one that's more patient from the very beginning than the others. But yet, it's still something that even when you have a child that has that calmer, easier going, maybe personality, that you still have to help them understand patience and what it is and what the benefits of it are. And maybe we can talk about those benefits for just a little minute about being patient, how waiting and thinking about things before we make that hasty decision. Yeah, I am going to wait and not buy all this other stuff I want right now, but save, and get something bigger that I want even more.
Yeah. I think delayed gratification itself is an acquired taste. For people who collect wine, that might be a challenge sometimes to put things lock them up for, say, we'll see you in 5 or 7 years. I mean, that I never could do that as a young person. Now, a little bit older, it's easier to do. But it's very contextual. I mean, if you're stuck in a traffic jam and you're trying to get to a hospital, patience may not be a virtue. Patience means you honk the horn, you pull into the inner lane, and you stream pell-mell and do what you got to do to save your life or somebody else's. So that's not a lacking of patience. That's you shift into gear about a higher purpose than just simply somewhat of a consciously understood or modulated sort of inner calm, inner sense of tranquility, which can certainly pay off. But even then, when we think of people who are accomplished in meditation, I use this in my practice a lot. You see pictures of Zen Buddhists who are sitting in black robes facing the wall. They're not moving. They look like they're completely impassive. Their minds are empty, which is completely untrue. I mean, they're wrestling with the same things, admittedly, maybe a little lower level. But a lot of them are thinking, oh my God, did I pay my rent before I left for this retreat? Or my back is killing me or whatever. So you become aware of what the mind does. Mind creates thoughts. And for some people, those can be crazy making, particularly if you're tending toward panic or anxiety or ADHD. Those can get you very excited. But even when you're not, you begin to notice, my mind is distractible by its very nature. So this distractibility that's inherent to us, I think that's also, we bring, even in work I do, bring into consciousness. This is the way my mind works. It's the way your mind works. It's everybody's mind works that way. So how do we then bring to consciousness and be able to grapple with that? And for the honors class, you then can take yourself on a spiritual level and say, well, who's doing the watching? That's another question altogether. But you begin to create an awareness of it's like meta thinking. I'm aware that I'm not patient. I'm aware that I'm nervous. I'm aware that I have goals, that things I thought my to-do list I would do, it didn't get done today. Maybe they were really important. Maybe they're just like trivial. So sometimes you have to categorize what's worth worrying about and what's not.
Exactly. And I think, and you can help me with this, but I think that as parents grapple with their own patience or the lack thereof, right? I think it's important for us to be able to put that over on our kids and understand that I've had all these years to work on patience and I'm still struggling with it. And yet I'll get upset at a 2-year-old who has had 24 months compared to my many years to work with it. And we expect them to show these higher levels of patience that that definitely are not developmentally appropriate for where they are in life. And
yeah, I remember flying off the handle with our son in his teenage years, someplace, getting into some of the usual troubles that teenagers get into.
Yeah.
And I was so exasperated. I said, why can't you have a problem that isn't like the one I had when I was your age? It's driving me insane. I was in trouble with the same sort of stuff. I should be understanding. Have a different set of problems, not the ones I had. So, but you catch yourself. With a 2-year-old that misbehaves, it's like you think I'm not a very good parent. I don't have any control over a 2-year-old, and that's where patience really has to kick in. I think what we observe in grocery stores a lot of times with ill-mannered children, screaming kids, grabbing stuff, and the parents are set off. They can be swatting a kid or yelling at the kid or whatever. So you see some parents that don't have that trouble at all. Those kids are well-adjusted, they're emotionally regulated. But others, it's like it's easy to trigger parents. And if they themselves were raised that way, if their mothers treated that mother with impatience and flying off the handle about this or that, or being judgmental or punishing without understanding what's really going on with the kid, then it just perpetuates. I mean, it was the classic definition of generational trauma.
Right, exactly. And I think, too, that sometimes understanding that I know what I don't want to do, especially maybe if you've had that traumatic or pushy parent or whatever that didn't model it appropriately, but I don't know what to do instead because this is what I know, right? And so trying to get yourself, well, I'm just going to be more patient. That's a nice sentiment, but you kind of need to have a plan on what am I going to do?
Sometimes we have to do the counterintuitive or something, again, kind of more of an advanced skill within. And sometimes we have to surrender to our own impatience. Just say, I know this is the way I am. So when I do, I'm better off taking a little walk outside or getting away from it for a couple of minutes, get my act together to be able to come back to it and regain my composure. Because if I know if I have a hair-triggered temper, I can't let that just be an act of punishment by blowing my lid all the time. But you have to have the awareness, number one, before you can begin to find a new lever for control. And from a therapeutic point of view, of course, I'm always interested in what's the trigger anyway? What kind of complex is being triggered? It's likely, since we all have a parental complex, mother or father or both, it's a lot of that early patterning starts when we're quite young, as you mentioned before, and it's deeply ingrained, really deeply ingrained.
Absolutely it is. And so it's just an interesting thing that I feel like sometimes parents can take the same advice that I give them to use on their kids in that, and being a teacher, you're an educator, so you are there, but I'm like, let's get data. Right? And so when I'm coaching parents, I'm often that first week is pick whatever we're going to start working on first. And whatever that is, let's take this week and check off, like, am I yelling at my kids or what am I doing that I want to work on first? And then how often is this happening? When is it happening? What time of day? Who is it involving sometimes? Too, certain people will trigger your lack of patience more than others. So if I'm working on myself, I want to maybe take some time to say, all right, let me look at when this is happening to me. And then once I have that data, what can I do then to set myself up for more success?
Right. And I think you have to, again, this is my psychotherapist self-talking, but sometimes to do that kind of checklist or self-examination, you really have to work on starting that with a point of grounding, literal, like a self-guided meditation, 2 minutes to take the energy down all the way and get your feet on the ground and let gravity take over, number one. Number two is maybe a little bit of somebody giving you the permission to be imperfect. Allow yourself to be vulnerable. Yeah. Like, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how I do this. Well, the I don't know question response is actually sometimes going to be a very good thing because it's a puzzle. We can stay with us. Why am I this way? Why am I that way? And so it's that kind of self-reflection of what I'm doing rather than some kind of plan I'm either executing or not executing for a particular outcome. Now, it's silly to say you're not looking for an outcome in your child or even yourself. But if it's only judged against those things, we never quite get into the deeper part in here that we examine our own psycho-emotional disposition and accept it for what it is. I mean, at least at a certain time. Now, that's not to say that you acknowledge that you slap your kid even once, let alone a bunch of times. So I'm not saying accepting that, but also recognizing the vulnerability that we all have. And sometimes that vulnerability is it is not a weakness. It can be a strength, but it's a tough challenge to be vulnerable with your own child. At this moment, I don't know what to tell you because I'm frustrated. You're frustrated. I don't know what to do. And right now I'm going to have to let that be and let it be okay. Be okay. Yeah. So you're setting an example. Sometimes you can just set it aside and say, right now, I'm just not on top of this issue, and maybe I'm not supposed to be right then. Maybe I'm not supposed to know. And maybe I'm not supposed to know what makes you tick. Maybe I'm not supposed to know at this very moment. I've got you, the child, all figured out. That's tough order anyway, because kids, until they have any cognitive ability to kind of express it in later life, teens and beyond, well, they can't articulate it. They just have that own psycho predisposition for who they are, and there's no cognitive reasoning for that. Yeah. I think it's just some of it's a matter of growing up.
Exactly. And there's that too. And I think too, as we were talking about how important those early years are, right? In all kinds of, every area of life, honestly, that first year especially, and then I would say the first 5 years, and then the next milestone for me is 8 years, when different synapses start firing in the brain and they're able to start understanding things on a different level. So we can do things. There are things that we can do to help our kids. And especially if we notice, we have a child that is maybe more patient than others, or I've got a child that is extremely impatient. My thing is then, how can I help them through experiences, through my modeling, through whatever, but how can I help them not squashing their personality, but using that and saying, I think this will serve us as we work together. So talk to me about maybe understanding, watching our kids and helping them understand and helping us understand how those moods and those feelings come into play with this.
Well, I think in getting back to what I mentioned before, if a kid somehow knows or has been told by a parent or a teacher, here are the rules, here's the expectations, you do these things, you're going to stay in the box, no problem. But if you stray off that, problems. And so being under the gun for some kids feeling like they're always being evaluated on whether they're living up to the expectations or they've checked the box. Some kids will rebel just to say, this is not who, not consciously, I'm more than this. And I'm frustrated with you by trying to put me in a box of your expectations was not who I am. So one of those ways, I think, is that which I've talked a bit about, is the importance of play. Unstructured time. There's no outcome intended. There's no expectation. Generally, within it's not endless time, but a pretty big amount of time to themselves. Also, having activities that are not planned, not helicoptered. I probably when you grow up, I did too. Kids stay out all hours. If your parents generally thought you're within a couple miles, you're okay. In 1957,
and no cell phones, no tracking to see where we are, calling or,
I think I mentioned this one to you. In 1957, the National Kindergarten Reading Criteria was not all the stuff about math and science. One of them was, to a parent, can you drop your child off 4 blocks from where you live, and can they walk home alone?
Yeah.
Today, that'd be considered, there have been parents who have been arrested for that kind of stuff. It's a form of abuse. Now, I'm not saying cross a busy street, but you know what I mean? It's like, can you walk home? And that was, I think, kind of helping encourage and model a kind of self-reliance, that we're looking for self-reliant kids. And we don't give kids much of a chance when you're in Little League and piano and art lessons and music, on and on and on. And school's no different. They got all their stuff. You got homework. Suddenly you're cram jam. It's no wonder kids don't crack, because so much of it doesn't really, with some exceptions, of course, really, unless they hit something they love, like, say, sports or music, that it's more or less just, it's like being in a military drill. You just got to do this and that and that. And it stifles that inner creative drive, I think, if you will. But I think that's why when you can be less concerned, where outcomes are more inconsequential. So, for example, if you go to pottery class or you're dealing with clay, it's nice if you can make a cup or a bowl or a statue or whatever. But you can also just play with the dang stuff. Yeah. Just play with it.
Yeah. Make
it and remake it. I do a thing with my own clients sometimes. It's called scribble drawing. It's like, one way to cut through. So if they're talking about their anxiety, I go, well, I don't know what anxiety is really. So you draw a picture with pastels of your anxiety. I'll draw a picture of mine, and we'll show it and hold it up to each other. Totally fascinating. Their definition a scribble is not a picture. It's don't draw a car. Don't, on the other hand, if your anxiety looks red, well then red. But if you do it really colored in hard, if that's what it is to you, So very self-revealing, and also show all the differences we have in these psychological states. We say, oh, that's depression, that's anxiety. They're in oppositional defiance. That's why they don't pay attention to the teacher at school or us at home and so forth. And sort of begin to get out of that to understand what energetic impulses are going through a person before you can get there, and also make it okay. Because if you have yours, I've got mine. And I'm going to show you what mine looks, and I'm going to see what yours look. If you'll show it to me, then it's a different conversation.
It's a totally different conversation. Yeah. And I think kids are so much more capable than we give them credit for. And especially today, we're overprotecting them, or we're clearing the way so they don't have any problems to solve. We're going to jump in and solve those problems. And so they are not developing that patience even in themselves, or the patience of having to work through some kind of problem solving with a friend or with a sibling or whatever, because we're just jumping right in. And there's a level of patience that goes with being able to disagree with someone or be upset with someone and still manage to have a conversation and not end the relationship, but to say, oh, okay, we're different here.
When you realize how much one of the tools people can use is the ACEs. ACEs stands for what? It's an
adverse
index
childhood event.
Yeah. I mean, you can do even a mental rubric without having to take a 10-point test. But if you've been around as many kids as I have been in classrooms and at school level, even at a school district level, we're naive to think that there's so many kids that are not in those indexes way up there. It's almost like they're programmed to fail. If you get to high school, your first semester, if you flunk 2 classes, you're not going to graduate.
Yeah, you're done.
And I've gone through with principals. I'd say, well, show me those kids. Show me the names of them. Let's go through the ones that are already on the set up to fail list. And it's like, yeah, they're not doing well in math. They don't understand algebra. Can't read very well. Okay, so the idea was, well, they need more math and they need more reading to pick up the deficit. But when you hear the stories, we're talking about gang homes. We're talking about divorces, poverty. The stuff we're talking about actually sounds like first world problems compared to a lot of other kids. Yeah. And there, where I live around the south end of Seattle, I mean, there's many districts in King County have maybe as many as different home languages spoken at home. Yeah. That's a lot. Yeah. And a lot of them are coming straight from SeaTac, the airport. I remember being in a school one time, and they were from Ethiopia, I think. It was like, I think their first or second day, and I stood in the lunchroom and watched these kids. And so on one hand, there's food, so that's a good thing. But then these little kids kind of just threadbare and kind of just so heart-wrenching. And then the lunch lady gives them a corn dog. It's like, well, what's a corn dog? What do I do with it?
Yeah.
So I'm just saying there's some, from certain perspectives, there's such deficits. The kids come into life experience schools, families just in general, I mean, where it's just hard scramble just to stay alive, just to have food on the table. Yeah. Food deserts. A lot of people live in food deserts where there's no grocery store within 3 or 4 miles, and there's no transportation home. You have to take a bus to go to the grocery store every time. So.
Yeah. And that's such a big issue, I think, too, in teaching kindergarten. And I mostly taught in inner city, very low income, high crime, lots of gangs. I was always thrilled when I got a dad to come to parent-teacher conference, but a little surprised when they'd had the face tattoos. I was like, oh, okay. But I think that having patience as an adult to say, and even if they're our own kid, and maybe we are having problems with income and with stability and with all of that, and maybe we are having those problems, but there are some evil parents that do not want what's best for their kids.
Right.
But I think for the most part, we really want to take care of and help our kids, but to find the ways for them to come to school. And I would see kids come to school. I would have I'm thinking of a specific little boy now who came to school with his mom's flip-flops on. And we were in Denver in the winter because they couldn't find any other shoes for him to put on. And how are they going to learn anything, let alone patience, when they're dealing with those kinds of issues? And now, even if you have this beautiful home and you've got steady income, good careers going on, and mom and dad love each other and all of that, you're still going to have times when this child is dealing with something internal. And so sometimes we tend to, well, my kid's okay. We're here and there. And yet, maybe it's just a nightmare. Maybe it's somebody coming to visit that isn't usually there that can set them off. Maybe there's a loss, even a pet or a good friend that moved away, or those kinds of things that can really affect a child, and where their level of patience is going to be. They're going to be short-tempered with different things. So yeah, we have the lower income kids that have so much going on, but we don't want to discount what's going on with middle and higher income kids too.
Right, right. I mean, it's a little bit like Maslow's hierarchy. I mean, there's, for some kids, as you're mentioning,
Very much so.
food and clothing and survival, number one. Without that stuff, forget it. On the other hand, as we mentioned earlier, these various kinds of actual real life trauma, developmental trauma, the lack of bonding in the early years, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse at home, all that big ball of wax of trauma, or in that matter, highly professional parents who are so busy with their own careers that they barely touch base with their kids. Anyway, with all these kids, it's a state of dissociation. That's the imprint. That's the calling card of trauma is dissociation. So in a school setting or teaching other parents, I think the number one rule of how the extreme impact of dissociation is, in fact, just the opposite, is connection, whatever that means.
Yes.
If you go to that kid in third grade who's just barely getting by, but now he's got some shoes, he got some food in his stomach, and wants to be recognized, and all that takes is a pat on the back, like a moment to chat. It happens several times a week just to say, we're connecting, I know you, how are you doing? That's where that connection begins. And that's where we begin to take what you're talking about when people are out of control, where the dissociation is running rampant. And in moments for even well-adjusted kids and families, there are those moments where things are a little out of control, where you're not regulated. But what they've learned almost de facto, if you've got most of a loving family and things are secure and so forth, it's a way you build resilience, is because you can learn that you can be a little out of control or a little depressed and get yourself back into that zone of tolerance, we call it. That's what creates resilient people. It's not a happy-go-lucky, pain-free life. This is why there's so much angst, rightfully so, about being in sports, for example. Everybody gets an award for whatever. You showed up, you get an award. You get a trophy for just being here. You don't ever really learn the benefit of failure or the being in the butt end of bad sportsmanship to teach you something else. That if you haven't felt like what it's to be on the butt end of bad sportsmanship, it's hard to turn around and be a good sport. So that's why I think this kind of the hard knocks of life, whether we choose them or not, always come our way. We learn, if we're lucky, through guidance and support of some kind or another, or people who are just simply, you talked about parent skills, just being able to hold that. If your 13-year-old daughter just broke up with her boyfriend in 8th grade and she's heartbroken, we're going, oh my God, well, we probably did it too, so. Yeah. But on the other hand, being able to hold that, you don't have to intercede, you just hold that place for her until it's time not to hold anymore. You don't have to come up with a solution. In fact, the more you try to do well, honey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? You might get away with a little of that, but mostly you're not going to. It's just, and the predicate of that, of course, is listening. And at age 13, there's not a lot of self-revelation that's going to come from a 13-year-old. That's part of what you have to accept.
Yeah. I love the way that you said just holding that. And just saying, I know this is hard, or I know that you're frustrated, or whatever it is, and not lecturing them on that. When they're in that state of mind, they're not going to learn anything anyway.
And that's what good therapists do. As Forrest Gump would say, your stuff into the office with some of your nightmares, some of your closely held secrets, some of the stuff that doesn't make you look very good, or you're just a jumble of a broken heart, or anger, rage, whatever, sadness. That you can kind of, in time, sometimes it happens immediately, but other times it slowly will, come out. And this is a place where you can have it come out and not judge. You can, at least by listening. Now, later you start to parry around some of the things on how you begin to work your way through this stuff. But at those moments, you just kind of, with all of its warts and imperfections, with all of its things where there's maybe justifiable reason for self-blame, how we begin to let some of that go. It's not so much what you do, it's a matter of how you begin to move forward. And that can be true of a 5-year-old or a 50-year-old. I mean, we sometimes face those, except it's more conscious. We like to think, anyway, for adults on the older side of the scale, but sometimes that's not true either.
Yeah. Sometimes
people come with a remarkable lack of self-awareness and don't want to go there. Give me a solution, tell me what to do. I don't want to go probing into my life. Let's find another way to do this.
Right. And I think understanding who you're dealing with and where they are is going to affect how you approach a situation with that as well.
Right.
Whether they're 2 or whether they're 22. You're going to really take a look and see. And then 2, we've talked about that feeling of safety, being safe. And that, so it's not even just safe that I have a roof over my head and clothes on my back and food in my belly, but it even goes, I am safe in my mom's arms. I am safe even when I'm having a rough time. I am safe with my parents, with their opinion of me and with the love that they show me or whatever. That's when then we're able to move on to some of these other values, including patience, and we're able to talk to them outside of the moment.
Right.
In the moment is when we just need to show our best patience, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. And then outside of the moment, when things are calm, we can do some role play, or, there are a bunch of things you can do with kids that let them talk about, well, I just heard on the news that, there were these 2 little boys and they were fighting over, whatever. What do you think they should have done? Or just having some of those fun conversations,
Right.
But it's outside of the moment.
Yeah, it is. You're right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I know, gosh, this time goes by so quickly.
Oh, it does.
Oh, my goodness. So, Stephen, if any of our listeners want to get a hold of you or learn more, and especially about your books and some of the work that you've done there, how would they get in touch with you?
Well, all the contact information is on my website. Again, it's one word with a PH. Mine is Stephen, StephenRowley, 108.com. It's got not only all the stuff about my practice, my contact information, it also has a whole page or a little bar up at the top about the memoir. And that you'll find more about the book, all the podcasts I've done, articles I've written, all that kind of stuff. But I'm also very amenable to having people, my email address is there, contact me with questions or your input or whatever. So I enjoy that.
Fine. We're the same on that. That's so cool. Yeah. And of course, we're going to put all of that information, everyone, in the show notes. And so if you didn't have a pen at the ready and weren't able to write all of that down, don't worry. We're going to put all of that down in the show notes so you can get that. So now, Stephen, before you go, I ask all of my guests the same question. And we all know that there are no perfect parents, hence the title of our podcast, Imperfect Heroes. But there are parents who seem to be more successful than others. How would you describe a successful parent?
Okay, I've got a couple criteria. We've covered some of this. And all of these will seem common sense because it sounds good. It's in the execution. But number 1, unconditional love. We say we unconditionally love our love until it's like, well, if you would have scored that extra goal, or if your SAT would have been 100 points, or if you hadn't, this, that, and the other thing, then something becomes conditional. And I interview students who have applied to Stanford, seniors I just finished with the round. I can tell with some kid, they are striving ever more to do what mom and dad would like to think they're going to, where they want to go to college and what they want to major in, even though they're not interested. I call that conditional love. Number 2, I think, is also the next 2 and 3 are both listening without judgment, trying to really listen deeply, and also having the patience not to respond, even to stuff you don't like to hear.
Yeah.
3rd, you also mentioned security. That can be emotional security. Not everybody has financial security. But there's lots of kids who grow up without a lot of financial means in their homes, but they're really well adjusted. They learn to accommodate to their worlds. But if mom and dad seem squared away, even sometimes in divorce settings, although it can be its own trauma, if the number 1 motivation for a custody arranging a parent plan is number 1, the kid, sometimes we ignore the fact that security can be really disruptive. We don't have mutual ways in which we're going to be able and have the same party line, so to speak, with our own kids about how important they are, and we base everything around them. Okay, the next one is maybe the toughest of all, I think, for parents, and that is Joseph Campbell talked about follow your bliss. I see so many kids where it's the parents' expectation, the parents' agenda for them, and many parents fail to take the time to recognize what is that little light bulb that's in them, their own bliss, what they're really most interested in. Anyway, the last one, which you've already mentioned, I think is vulnerability. Well, we can model for our kids. Can we teach kids' parents? I was just having over at my little neighborhood coffee place, there was a little girl who I had these polka dotted pants and a cute little sweater and matching shoes. I said, gee, I love your polka dotted pants. And she said, oh, thank you so much. And I said, I got this other outfit that goes with this. She pulled my sleeve and said, you're a really nice man. And I said, but you're a really nice girl. But I said, you know what? I'll bet you anything. You didn't just grow up learning how to be nice. Somebody taught you how to be that. And Dad's saying, you don't teach it, you model it. This goes back in both mom and dad family tree and getting themselves right.
Yeah.
It's as though they're the ones who are going to put the stopper in the trauma. That generational trauma, the bad mothering stops with me. even when you don't know how. It doesn't matter. If the intent's there, then that's the kind of person you are. It's something to be acquired, to be able to know in your own skin. That's what I refer to as like a deep emotional. I may not know who I am on some level, but I know who I am and what my values are.
Right. That was a fabulous answer. Thank you so much. That was
You're quite
great.
welcome.
So everyone, I would just love to encourage you again to rate and review and give your kids that chance. Model the patience, teach them about it. And if you have any questions, I know Dr. Rowley would love to talk to you. I know I would love to talk to you and help you come up with some plans on how to make all of this happen for you and for your family. Next week, we're going to have our parent expert on patience. And so we'll be talking about that. And so until then, let's find joy in parenting. Bye, guys.